So good morning, everybody. We're going to do a couple things differently. We're going to move to talking about execution. As the panelists get settled, let me first thank Jeff and Jim for encouraging the NewSchools Venture Fund to be a partner in convening this event today. For those of you who don't know, NewSchools Venture Fund, Steve Case made our business model this morning. We're a venture philanthropy, and we exist to help education entrepreneurs across that great desert from idea to sustainability. As I look around the room, I think that there are at least 5 of the entrepreneurs that we're supporting, and so you can test that proposition out with them at your leisure. But it's terrific to be here and terrific to be a part of this panel. And very quickly, going down the row, you do know that we have convened today as the Mark Edwards fan club. We've heard, Mark, you've got the press that you've got to live up to is extraordinary. National Superintendent of the Year, Superintendent in, as we've heard, Mooresville, the leading district in terms of implementing one-to-one learning in the country, and looking forward to hearing more about that, Mark. Next to Mark is Judy Burton, a good friend and colleague from Los Angeles. Judy is the founder and president of Alliance Charter Public Schools. And the Alliance is the largest and most successful charter management organization in LA. Over 10,000 students, 22 schools, and in the latest rankings, 2 of the top 10 high schools in Los Angeles are Alliance schools. Joel Klein truly needs no introduction. Joel gave me a ribbing about the tie. I told him that as a new DC resident, I bought one.
I've got a closet full for you.
We'll trade for the Silicon Valley attire. Joel has been responsible for the radical and positive transformation of the New York City public schools under his term as chancellor, and currently is the CEO of Amplify, which is working hard and succeeding at doing a lot of the work that we're talking about doing today. And look forward to hearing from Joel about how Amplify is going. Governor Bob Wise has led a large number of discussions around the country about digital learning and is currently at work with a range of school districts and is going to be able to provide us a national perspective on what this all means. And that's where I wanted to start this morning is we've talked about policy. We've talked about the prospects for digital learning to both close the digital divide and lift up the aspirations and the achievement of students across the nation, no matter what their economic circumstance. And this conversation is designed to take us down a level to the level of execution and implementation. And so to start out, I'd really like you guys to just sort of warm up a little bit and describe the elephant that is blended learning. And I think you've each got a part of a leg or a trunk or an ear. And I'd love to just sort of in a couple minutes, if you wanted these people to walk away with a picture of what blended learning is, what's it like? I'm going to start at the other end. Bob, what's blended learning after all?
So start with the guy that has never run a school.
That's the one.
But who is a passionate believer in blended learning. Blended learning, very simple definition, is the effective application of technology to boost learning outcomes that will take place for 90% of our students in a traditional brick and mortar school, or at least a place called school. And yes, there's online learning, and yes, there's homeschooling. There are all kinds of variations that technology makes possible, but for 90% of our students, blended learning is what's going to take place in that school, and every school and every school district will have its own blend. You go into a coffee shop, you either get Folgers or you get 6 different blends. And the important thing to recognize is that every school has a unique situation with connectivity, with teaching force, with so on, and that blended learning means that you address that uniqueness. It also means something else. It is not using technology to diminish the role of teaching, it enhances the role of teaching. What one superintendent said to me is, now every teacher is an educational designer. So that's what blended learning is. And the vision that is so important for policymakers is to understand that it is taking place in every school, that every school district and every school has to be making plans within the next 2 years, and I'll get to that later, Ted perhaps in later remarks, but just think of the decisions that every school superintendent, Mark and the others up here face in the next 2 years. They're implementing college and career-ready standards. They are dealing with constrained budgets. They have a changing role of teaching, rapidly changing, and they now have technology that was not available before, and price points are dropping. And incidentally, they've got to make decisions about how you blend all of that in just the next couple of years. And these decisions, incidentally, are going to reverberate and go through our system for the next 20.
For a guy who professes that you don't know what you're talking about, that's a pretty good example, actually. I don't think I want. I would just say the key to me in this blending, and even the phrase I'm a little chary about. The key to me is really to take the core ingredient in K-12, which is the teacher, and to be able to support in every way possible and literally amplify and develop in ways that technology can make the teacher more effective at the learning experience. And so to me, how you blend it, et cetera, it's so key in what Bob said. It's critical that the blender be the teacher. And then you can think of so many different things that he or she can do through technology to enhance the learning experience. And the one thing I want to underscore from this morning, which has been truly great, is nobody up here is selling gadgets and gizmos. This is not the Consumer Electronics Show. This is all about teaching and learning. And if we don't look at it through that particular lens, we're going to miss the whole boat. When I was chancellor of New York City schools, I was astonished at how many schools literally left their laptops and their desktops in the basement because they saw no particular learning value. And if we don't get that piece right, all the other pieces aren't going to matter.
So in Alliance schools, middle schools and high schools, if you were to visit our 11 schools that are implementing blended learning, you would see students in those classrooms actively engaged in their own learning. You would see, instead of the teacher teaching to the common denominator, the entire class, you'd see 3 small groups of students in most classrooms where the teacher is teaching to a small directed group of students. You would see students applying their learning in a collaborative station. You would see students learning individualized content based on their individual needs. So the biggest shift that you'll see, notice I said 11 schools, we have 22 schools. We decided that we would implement blended learning in every new school that we open. So this is our 4th year implementing blended learning. It's really been a laboratory approach where we have learned from our teachers and principals about what works, what doesn't work. So we're constantly making changes about how students learn and how using technology as a tool supports the work of the teacher. Primary supports, teacher doesn't have to wait till the end of the week or the end of the month, God forbid, to learn how students are doing, and the students don't have to wait for the teacher to tell them how they're doing. They can monitor their own learning because they can see the data from the digital content that we use. You will see in blended learning classrooms, not textbooks, you will see digital content, and you will see students moving away from finding the right answer, students moving away from what they're learning to how they can apply what they're learning. That's a huge shift from the way that our schools are functioning. I think we were experts at multiple choice testing. That's why we're top of the list. We've moved away from that. We're focusing more on critical thinking, on students applying their learning, on students being able to work with each other, and on students being aware of what they're learning and working with the teacher as a facilitator versus waiting for the teacher to tell them what comes next.
So we're just loading up the teacher panel for later, by the way. This will all come down to that. Mark?
Well, you know, I'm so excited to be here today, but I'm also inspired by hearing so many comments about the key to this has everything to do with teachers. Both my parents are retired public school educators, and I really do believe that anyone that has visited Mooresville or has studied it would tell you that the key to our success has everything to do with teachers. Mm-hmm. And teachers doing great work as learners. And one of the things when I think about blended learning, I really think that we do think of the classroom or the school, but I really think the blended model has to do with learning anytime, anywhere, mm-hmm. all the time, students and teachers connecting outside of normal hours, connecting with different places, different people, different opportunities. and different types of access. And I think that it's created a synergy, a relevance for students and teachers. I think that the focus has to be on students, but we have to empower our teachers with connectivity, with a sense of understanding that they have resources available to them to improve their work. And I really think we should all be fired up and should be all excited. In fact, I think we're at ready, set, and all we have to do is push the go button. And we're going to be ready to take off in so many ways, but I think that the aspect of students understanding that learning goes on everywhere, that teachers understand that learning goes on everywhere, it changes the whole dynamic of how we connect, how we learn, and the great potential for all of our schools.
Perfect. So, Mark, let me follow up with that and ask you and Judy in particular to help folks understand sort of your journey into the world of blended learning and sort of what worked fastest and what were the hardest obstacles to overcome. Because I think we've already heard this morning that one of the shibboleths, perhaps, is that it's just so hard to get anything done in the system. And both of you, from different ways, have been able to do that. So. How'd you do it? What made you move in this direction? And what are some of the things, perhaps the connectivity issue, other things that have come up in the lead commission's reports that we should pay attention to?
Well, back in 2000, I was serving as superintendent in Henrico County, Virginia, and in 2000 we deployed 26,000 laptops to all 6th through 12th graders, and I would describe that as being on the bleeding edge. Yep. And it was we hit a lot of turbulence, a lot of bumps, a lot of infrastructure issues, but we saw the potential for this opportunity. And I think it was, we talk about the digital divide, I think it was an equity divide, an opportunity divide, and an aspirational deficit. And as I fast forward moving to Mooresville, a district that is a working class community, a district that a few years ago our graduation rate for African American students was in the 50s. Last year it was 98.7, #1 in the state of North Carolina. And I really think it has to do with building a confluence of synergy and expectations. Our teachers today say they cannot imagine going back to the old world. They can't imagine it. We had a visitor in last spring, and he saw some textbooks up on the shelf, and he asked a student, he said, do you ever use the textbooks over there? And the student said, well, what for? And it wasn't, the student was not being a smart aleck. The student did not understand that context. I do think that instructional developmental nurturance for faculty and staff is essential. And lots of teachers, change management's tough. It's hard. It's asking people to change their world. Some of the most resistant teachers in Mooresville 5 years ago today are leading the charge. And I think we have to have a consistent position of instructional nurturance, constant professional development. Our school board made some very wise decisions early on, and we embedded 12 early release days a year for focused professional development. And once we had the momentum going and a sense of this will be better for teachers and for students and for the community, and building this sense of aspiration for all. And I really do think that a lot of it has to do with change management, organizational design, so that there's a sense of lifting and pushing, and lifting and pushing. And I think that every district in this country has the potential to get this done, but I think so much of it has to do with a collective will. Not the will of a superintendent, not the will of a school board, but building a collective will and then pushing through the hardships.
Great. That's great. Judy, does that sound familiar to you?
Sort of. So with Alliance Schools, our journey was a little bit different. We kind of had a Pied Piper in the form of Ambassador Frank Baxter, who's our board co-chair.
Hello, Frank.
Who was constantly pushing us to do more, do it differently, be creative. And I think the person he was most worried about was me, because we were already successful, already had our school performing at the top of the list in the district. And here comes Frank wanting to do something different. So we started with actually 2 high schools who were keenly interested. We had them actually pilot the concept. We did a lot of research for several months before we started anything, looking across the country and working with different partners to see what are people thinking, what are people doing. we quickly found that people didn't really know much more than we did. So we just went about it in a laboratory approach, thinking it through and coming up with our theory of action about what mattered to us and why we wanted to use the technology to achieve our goals. And that's how we moved towards individualized student learning, focusing more on competency-based learning, focusing more on helping students, individual students, move as fast as they could, or students taking as much time as they needed to, getting as much help as they needed. So we have, in our 11 blended learning schools, every single student has a device. We focus on adaptive, interactive digital content, and we're constantly looking at ways to make sure that students are able to use the data about their own performance, that students are able to communicate in a very different way with their teachers. There's no such thing as raising your hand in a digital content classroom. You email the teacher. Or the technology that we're using allows the students to raise their hand by pushing a button on their computer, and the teacher can see the entire classroom and who needs help. So the journey that we've been about has been constantly perfecting our theory of action about how to use technology as a tool to support the classroom teacher. I will say that probably after the first week, people started asking, so what's the data? Has it improved yet? But after, we're in our 4th year now, our schools that are using technology as a tool in blended learning had the highest gains on achievement tests. It took some time to get there. So the one thing I would say to everyone, you have to allow yourself the freedom to experiment. This is not the kind of work where someone has written a book and you go follow the rules. You have to create the rules and the systems and the theories that work in classrooms. And you have to be able to listen to classroom teachers about what really works and what doesn't. I want to add 2 other pieces beyond the classroom. We also have what we call a learning lab, where any student can take any online course they need to, either enrichment or to get ahead, or to repeat a class without having to hire a teacher. A third part to our approach to blended learning is distance learning. So if we have an expert teacher in one classroom, we're able to project that learning to another classroom and have students in different schools take a course from that same teacher. So each year we're constantly expanding the benefits of using technology in our classrooms.
And in LA, distance learning is 6 miles if it's on the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
The 405.
For sure.
Joel, one of the nagging criticisms, so one is, well, schools and districts can't move. They're actually not adopting this. The success of Amplify seems to turn that into a lie. Over 250,000 adoptions, moving strong. Love to hear what you're hearing from the field. But one of the other criticisms is that the content and the tools are too slow to develop. And that's, you've really tackled that head on. How's Amplify doing?
We're doing really remarkably well right now. We're just literally in the process as we speak this week, 16,000, every middle school kid in Guilford County, North Carolina. So we're coming after you, actually. And, no, everyone is on what we call the Amplify learning device. And we've spent the summer, all the things people are talking about, working with the teachers in Guilford County. So the first thing you find is with the proper supports, as Mark has pointed out, the teachers not only buy into it, but they really are excited about it. Biggest challenge is what the lead commission started to tackle, which is connectivity. Both connectivity inside the school district and connectivity at home for kids. But the first thing you've learned is this is something that teachers are welcoming and excited. The kids love it. And the thing that's fundamental about it is all the things that people are talking about are happening. So the kind of thing of constant assessment. It's just you're getting smarter and smarter. Driving content that's personalized, that's baked into the system. With one click, the teacher can say eyes on teacher. So all the worry about the kids playing Angry Birds and all the other things, the teacher maintains control. She sees every app that's on the kid's desk, what the kid is working on, and so forth. The ability to do it after school, before school. The ability to kids to connect up with each other. One of the kids in Atlanta, Georgia told me, said, I know exactly when my friends are going to be online now. And so instead of meeting on Facebook, we meet on literally on an Amplify tablet, and we're working with each other. So there's enormous, enormous receptivity to it, but all focused on a learning proposition. And the tools we create, things like quick polls and quick checks and things, teacher can tell immediately, just say to the kids, are you getting this? And the kid will draw up a smiley face or a sad face, and you can tell 2/3 of the class is not connecting to what's going on. It's not a bad way, rather than keep talking like I am, whether people are listening or not. It's not a bad way to get sort of constant feedback. So if I had you now and I'd have a quick check, is this working for you? Would be a good question. So same thing with quizzes that you can drive out and get feedback. Same thing with being able to prepare. Teacher can the night before really prepare the learning objects that you want to drive, those to the whole class, those that you want to put in different groups, those kids who are really not getting it at all and need personal. And the most amazing thing to me, and I've heard this 10 times now from different teachers, is that kids who they thought were totally out of it, completely disconnected from what's going on, are now the most avid learners in their classroom, that they find this medium enormously exciting. So the last piece, Ted, which we're coming out in a couple of months with, is the whole curriculum thing. And my own view in the end is really what this is about, is to bring the greatest learning. So we have got people like Chadwick Boseman, who starred in 42, the Jackie Robinson movie. We've got him doing dramatic readings of Frederick Douglass. We've now tested, if you give the kid the first chapter dramatically read by Chad Boseman, how many more kids stick with complicated text? We've got Walter Isaacson working on curriculum for us that's just going to be dazzling. So what I think is coming together are the tools, the content to create. The device is simply a way to transmit all the activity. And the connectivity makes this all feasible. So I think this is, those people were talking earlier this morning, this is a perfect storm kind of moment. That doesn't mean like in any perfect storm, you won't hit lots and lots of rough patches, you will. But the receptivity of teachers in particular excites me in a way that I have not seen in terms of the potential over the next 5-6 years.
We're seeing that as well in our portfolios, the viral adoption of new entrepreneurial solutions in the millions of teachers who over the course of 2 or 3 months are suddenly using this thing that didn't exist before.
We had a 35-year-old teacher down in Florida from Jamaica who had never used in her life technology, period, until she got onto this. And now she's the greatest believer. She kind of says, you know, I can't wait to get home when no one's around so I can play with this thing and see how it works. So if you get all that energy committed to improving what I think is a critical issue, the interface of teaching and learning, and the multiplier effect you can get out of this kind of thing, you can begin to see the potential. But it's got to stay at that interface of the way teachers teach and kids learn.
Yeah. Great. So we are going to have a chance. We're not going to do a fancy polling system, but we've got a microphone here, and in just a minute or so, I want to open the conversation up because there's been a lot of talking at you this morning, and we want to have an opportunity for you to engage with the panel. So get your questions. If you want to start coming over to the mic, that'd be super. Bob, so you've now heard 3 evangelists. You and I get to be the dose of reality here, right? So the Alliance for Excellent Education has a practice in going to districts and doing audits and helping them think about their preparedness for entering this really exciting world of mass customization for both students
well,
and
there's
teachers.
a reality. There's a reality. But now I want to talk about the practice, but there's also this incredible moment that's here. Because think about it for a second. There are only 2 things that happen once every 17 years in Washington, D.C. And one of them has already taken place, and that's the return of the cicadas. And the second is the FCC opening up for major infrastructure improvements, and that opportunity is here before us. Now, all that infrastructure in the blended learning and each of what we've heard here goes for naught if there isn't adequate planning. I was at a conference recently and I was struck by how many districts have now ordered a one-to-one device. The tipping point's clearly been reached. I mean, literally millions are going to be issued just this year alone, and what Joel's doing and everyone here is doing. But what the difference between what they're doing and what I think is happening in some districts is the planning that goes into it. Because it's not just the technology or the one-to-one device, it's what's the data, how does that integrate with the data systems? How does that work with the interactive software? How is it that you've already set a plan for identifying what are your learning goals, and namely for every state now, it's college and career ready, whether you call it Common Core or college and career ready. So you identify your goals, what are your challenges, and now how have you gone through a planning process that how do you change the role of teaching? How do you change the role of time, competency-based versus seat time? And then finally, what's the appropriate technology to address that which you just worked out? And so that's a whole different enterprise. And then that's why what we started, and Ted's referring to at the Alliance for Excellent Education, is something called Project 24. That in the next 24 months, encouraging as many school districts as possible to go through this kind of comprehensive planning process. And we provide free, everything's free, online tools. We developed a strategy template working with consultants in an advisory group. Some of you are in this room. We developed a self-assessment that districts can take. It takes about 2 hours for a district leader and his or her counterparts. And then we have 7 components or gears, data and assessments, budgets, and so on, to work through to develop this comprehensive plan. Once again, learning outcomes, improving teachers and in learning outcomes that's what the goal is. But so now there's a plan for what it is you're going to purchase as opposed to purchasing and just planning. And I'm proud to say that in some form, we have 1,300 districts that are participating in some way, not all comprehensively, but in some way. And we also, and I just want to encourage you, September the 30th, if you go to Alliance for Excellent Education website, you can sign up for the second running of the MOOC for educators in conjunction with the Alliance and the Friday Institute at North Carolina State University to help walk through. And you can also get into discussion groups and working groups with your colleagues, whether from your state or others, about this planning process. But I do think, Ted, that one of the most critical things as moving forward is matching up, first of all, making sure the infrastructure is there, but making sure there's planning for how you're going to utilize all the benefits of the infrastructure plus everything that's been mentioned here.
So you don't end up where Joel ended up when you came into New York, which was with lots of warehouses and lots of basements filled with technology tools that nobody wanted or knew how to use.
Yeah, we just need to take Mark and Judy and Joel, and also I want to say I've been encouraged because I see superintendents now, they're really exciting groups across the country. We've done profiles on our website of El Cajon and Quakertown and Dysart in Arizona, and there are a number of others as well. I don't want to leave folks out, but there are a lot more superintendents that are really stepping up and providing the same kind of leadership.
No, and the Karen Cater is in and out today.
Yep, Karen with the League of Innovative
Karen's
Schools
work with
and
the League and
Digital Promise.
There's there really is a groundswell. Let me invite you to ask some questions or make some comments. Don't be shy.
If they were texting, we'd get a lot.
We get a lot. Yeah, and then it would show up here. So Bob, let me put the harder-edged question back to you while people are gathering their courage. So a lot of these 1,300 districts are coming to talk with you without naming names. Sort of what's the range of
Yeah, it's interesting. The average range ranges from 345,000 to 199. But I would say, and Mark pointed this out to me, I learned a lot from Mark even when he doesn't realize he's teaching. Mark, I think you told me your district's around 5,600 students, as I recall, and the average size in that size district is somewhere around, I think it's 80% of districts and 50% of students. And so what we're finding, Ted, is that those districts, the average size tends to, if you take out the biggest and the smallest, the average size tends to be around 10,000. And so what we think the part of the area that we're filling are those districts that don't have the resources for consultants, and we think if you can get a consultant, great. But what we're doing is we're filling a need for districts where the superintendent is also probably on hard snow days driving a school bus, and the chief technology officer is also involved in 3 other functions. And so this is a planning mechanism to help them get started. And then the other thing for the marketplace is what we heard one vendor say is, we appreciate this process because it makes for an informed consumer. It's not now they know what questions to ask as opposed to simply trying to sort through. I'm very excited because I think there is an explosion of technology that's finally working its way into the educational marketplace. And so, and many of you are involved in the purchase all the time. I see familiar faces out there. I think one of the challenges for a lot of superintendents and principals is what is it I should be getting? I know I have to be there, but what is it I should get? And how does it then how do I work it in with, once again, the data systems for teachers, the real-time responses and so on. So that's the exciting opportunity that I think is there.
And the Common Sense Media learning rankings, I think, it's an initiative that's going to be very helpful in helping to develop that educated consumer. Joel, what's the sweet spot for you?
Well, just one quick point about Mark. I just want to emphasize, because a lot of people today have talked about school districts are resource constrained. You know, what he proved is a creative leader who's willing to go through the change process can get it done. Because he's got a small school district. He doesn't have a lot of excess resources, and yet he's got the whole thing wired. He's got the whole thing one-to-one. He's got content being driven through to these people. So this is entirely doable with the right leadership. The sweet spot for me, I believe ultimately in the end is not just on the connectivity on the platform, but on the content, on really exposing kids to the richest kinds of opportunities and to make it both multimedia, multidimensional, and highly customized. So the kind of thing that we're talking about here, where not everybody, what Steve K said before is, you know, when you're one teacher, you've got 30 kids in a classroom, some of whom are struggling, some of whom are accelerating, some of whom are in the middle. And how do you orchestrate that kind of thing? Yeah. Everything to me about blending is to improve classroom orchestration by the classroom orchestra leader, the impresario, the teacher. And that's what the opportunities are here.
Putting power tools in the hands of teachers for the first time.
And great content and stuff that can really, so somebody interviewed me yesterday on television and asked me the question, he said, you mean while you're teaching the Civil War, you can actually show pictures and battlefields and things, you know, and people can start to see the capacity and the possibilities that, and the constant improvement that will go. Because one thing about a textbook, you buy it, you're stuck with it for 5 years. You get something that's alive and online, and I see kids aren't clicking on there, it's getting very little usage, we swap it out immediately. I mean, we are so sensitive to what's happening. And if a kid isn't using it, a teacher isn't using it, why the hell is it there? What's the how much of a textbook gets used in the course of an average year, right? If you're using 15% of it, it's a big year for you. And it's hard to keep it current. It's hard to keep it current. All of that we can change, and we can make it in a way, the kind of thing. I mean, our whole theory of change is if you can get kids to read twice as much as they're reading right now and write 3 times as much as they're writing right now, a lot of the other issues we're worried about are going to go away.
Textbooks, I remember my first vote that we took when I was a member of the California Board of Education when we were reviewing texts was the maximum weight. 3 pounds, by the way. So was our answer. Mark, you wanted to get in for a second, and then we've got our first.
I did want to share this because I was talking to my son last night, and we've worked with Common Sense Media, and I want to give a shout out. All of our parents go through a process in terms of training about appropriate use, not just for students, but appropriate use for the family understanding. But one of the downsides, we were talking, my son's, he's 13 years old, he said, you know, I don't like this, that you can go on and see my homework assignments all the time, and that you see my grades immediately. But I do think that this information dynamo, this connectivity between home, school, students, teachers, parents, changes the whole dynamic of learning. It really does add this sense of let's pull it together. And so I think there's huge, huge advantage to this blended connectivity, families, home, and school.
Yep, and the ubiquity of the broadband access.
Absolutely.
And the ubiquity of mobile, the increasing penetration of mobile tools that make it possible for parents across the economic spectrum to participate in that. Mark?
Yeah, hi. First of all, I'm going to go first, so I want everybody to stand behind me afterwards, so, you know, I feel like other people have some
Eric looks like he's making a move.
So my name's Mark Wolf, and I'm the co-founder, along with my business partner, Burton, of Reading Rainbow Kids. And so Reading Rainbow, some of you guys might know, our focus has always been on getting passion, right, for the education, passion for learning, passion for reading. And so content, Joel was just talking a little bit about content just about a minute or so ago while I was standing up here waiting. But I'd love to know a little bit more about how you guys feel about content and the other side of the driver, because there's a lot of driving. Teachers can do this and raise your hand and all that kind of thing, which is it's the going this direction. But sometimes I know from my own kids, when they were young, you need the other direction. You need that passionate, that content that excites them, like Angry Birds excites them, right? To want to interact with the technology. Otherwise, the technology is just could be a boring textbook where the teacher can spy on you, right? It has to be about the content. So I'd love for you guys to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on content.
I think we should be overjoyed and celebrating the incredible evolution of content.
Yeah.
The functionality that teachers and students have today is so robust, and I really believe that in terms of a moral imperative, when I think of schools and students and teachers that don't have access to this incredible new content that allows for personalization, connectivity, collaboration, mashup of building things together, that it makes no sense for our country not to push this forward, to push it across the finish line, because I really do believe that if we truly want to do what's best for students in this country, we will connect the opportunities. And I think that the content providers are being aggressive on building outstanding content, both small and large companies. We've seen tremendous advancement in just the last 2 or 3 years in terms of functionality to inform teachers, to personalize, to connect with students, to expand the students' interest in what they're doing. So I think that the content is ready.
And to make the form factor
It's
much more intense, right?
and the hardware. So I really think the connectivity, I mean, it really is ready, set. We have to push the go button as a country, and it makes all the sense in the world to do it. It makes no sense not to do it.
Judy?
I would say digital content has actually been one of our challenges. One of the digital content programs we used last year, we actually dropped because students feel that it was too boring, it was moving too slowly, wasn't rigorous enough, wasn't giving them feedback that was relevant to them, wasn't adaptive enough, wasn't interactive enough. The greatest challenge is there's tons of stuff out there, there's lots of garbage out there. Classroom teachers do not have time to explore 9 million different kinds of digital content. So I hope there are folks out there doing this work for teachers to help us screen through content. We are not buying textbooks, and we are not looking for flat online textbooks either. They have to be interactive, they have to be adaptive, they have to provide data back to the student and to the teacher, and we have to be able to integrate that data with other systems that we use. Exactly.
You're on to,
Yeah.
it's got to excite both the teachers and the students. If the
Yeah.
teacher's not lit up by it, she doesn't use it. If the kid's not lit up by it, we're wasting our time.
Absolutely.
And the kind of thing, for example, what we're doing, we now have 40 games that are aligned with our curriculum. One of them, a whole game world, that was designed by a guy named Jesse Shell at Carnegie Mellon called Lexica. And this damn thing is all about a library under siege and how you defend this library. And it's totally, it's so visual, it's all thumb driven. I'm like, I have no thumb, so I can't play it. But it's really, when we play test this with kids all the time. We throw some games at these kids and the kids say, literally, they say, this is no good. And so you just kill it in its early infancy. But the point you're making, if we don't get teachers lit up by digital curriculum and kids lit up by digital curriculum, all the rest will be gadgets, gizmos, tools, and games, but it won't matter. It won't change the learning equation. And that's why what you guys are doing is so important. Is you're focused on the real, so you keep asking what the sweet spot. The sweet spot is the interface between what the teacher is saying to the kid and what the kid is absorbing in them. And that's where blending can really enhance that interface.
Storytelling is the ability, can I just jump in?
Please. You're doing a great job.
Stand up so people can hear you. I'm not sure everybody
No,
can
well,
hear you.
we're from Hollywood, right? So our whole lives have been spent learning to tell stories to people. And that's what, if you can get them to pay $10 to go to the movie, you get them to watch the show, you got to get them to learn. And we've been, thank God, successful with the Reading Rainbow and our new digital business because we think we're able to get people to, the kids to want, as opposed to pulled versus pushed, right? And I think all of us in entertainment and all of us here need to look at the ability, looking for kids to want to pull it down. They want it so badly, and if they learn, you tell them they learn, it's broccoli. It's putting cheese on broccoli, right? But it gets them in. And I think we all in Hollywood need to do a much better job of creating our content that does that and use it.
Ted,
Systems you guys use.
one of the exciting things about this, though, is that a few years ago when we did textbook adoption, no matter how bad or clunky or you stuck with it. You said, well, still turn to page 37. The kids would all roll their eyes and say, God, get me out of here. Now, the bottom line is now, when we see content doesn't work, we turn it off. When we see teachers saying, I don't like this, we move on. And I think that we have a nimble approach to content that we've never existed before.
Right.
Nimble, and also a sense to advance at different levels. So I think that we're really in a great place that we've never seen before in terms of making adjustments as needed throughout the process.
And Jim Coulter brought this up this morning, where he said first, and you've done it, we can do tech and text at the same time. But then also that the marketplace is going to challenge producers to adopt, dismiss, in a very different cycle than any that we've seen before. And at some point, in a community of digital natives and close to digital natives, the willingness of people to put up with Oregon Trail 20.3 is going to be zero, and their market share is going to be zero. And I think it's a very exciting.
But the other
very
aspect
exciting
of content that's very important, another aspect that's very important, is remembering that now we have the ability for students to master that content and move on at their pace. And that's going to, and Jim Coulter, I think, referred to that earlier. It's what I call yesterday's reform is today's impediment, the 1906 change to the seat time law, where you've got 180 days seat time, which was a great reform, is today's impediment. And so in that technology and content, we also have to increasingly give students, teachers, the ability to move ahead at their own pace. Some states, New Hampshire being one, some of the others have already moved in that direction, others are going to be.
Great.
Hi, Eric Westendorf from LearnZillion. I have a leadership question. Judy, you talked about schools being laboratories, and Mark, I've heard you also talk about empowering teachers and groups of teachers to make decisions. It strikes me as something that you two have embraced. Joel, I know you embraced this in New York City as well, but is something that I imagine creates a lot of anxiety in systems that have traditionally been very top-down, where decisions are made at the top, and there's a lot of control there. And now a world where you actually do have teachers finding different content, finding things that are quite useful to them without principals or superintendents knowing about it right away, and sort of how you think about that challenge and how you see some of your peers grappling with that and transitioning.
I think that superintendents, I'm glad that Governor Wise mentioned this, I think superintendents all over the country are adapting a change model, a change management, a change approach to leadership for a participatory, distributed leadership model. It makes so much more sense. Rather than a centralized decision on content, you push it out to students, to teachers, and to the community. And I want to mention some colleagues that I would encourage everybody to pay attention to. Baltimore County, Dallas Stance Superintendent, pushing it out. Alan Lee in Baldwin County, Alabama, rocking it, making it happen. Terry Greer in Houston, Texas, 7th largest district in the country, pushing it straight ahead. Steve Webb out in Vancouver, Washington. There's great work happening all over the place. Lights are coming on, and I think a lot of it has to do with understanding that leadership today is about empowerment, direction, nurturance, rather than an autocratic top-down, this is a decision for all, because I think decisions have to change constantly. When I even think about the term blended learning, I think blended learning will evolve. I think it's more of a mashup of connectedness. But I think the exciting thing about this, if you have a lot of leaders out, you have a lot of leadership happening, and that lifts everybody.
I would just add to this, we shifted our thinking in that arena. When we were just starting, we did have all the schools using the same digital content because we were exploring, we were learning from each other. By the end of last year, instead, we set up criteria, a lens through which schools could choose the digital content. So now every school isn't using the same digital content program. So we're driven more by results than which digital content that you're using. That said, we did collectively choose one partner for our transition to Common Core state standards. And that we collectively decided on because we wanted to all learn from each other as we move forward. This is not just blended learning schools, it's every school. There are benefits to collective work, and then once you've done that collective work, then we feel more empowered to diversify. So we kind of do a little bit of both depending on the reason.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, you guys. I think you get the last question.
Oh, man. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophie Quinton. I'm a staff writer for National Journal here in DC. And I have a question about another elephant in the room, which is privacy concerns. If every student in the classroom is working through digital content, obviously, the content providers are collecting an enormous amount of data on how that student's mind works. Is protecting student privacy a concern for you? And if so, are there steps that need to be taken here in Washington to help protect it?
So, Joel, do you want to take a shot at that? And then Jim Steyer would like to leap in on that one as well.
So,
Then let me jump in after Jim.
Great.
sure, you want to jump in before
Nope,
me? Go
nope.
ahead. All right.
I never jump in front of Joel Klein. I'll tell you.
That's why.
I'm going to leave that just where you put it. So I think the short answer is yes, it's a potential concern, and people ought to be sensitive to it. There's a lot of federal law on it, FERPA and other laws, and it seems to me, at least the policy we take is we don't want individualized data. The individualized data belongs to the school district. So it's people, what I used to do, or it's people that are running districts or running schools, they need the data to make sure that what Judy's doing is happening for the kids and customizing and all of that. I need data that's anonymized to do my work, to make sure that my products are better and so forth. If a school wants to, on rigorous protocol, have me do some of the individualized analysis, that's up to the school district. But I think if we keep in mind that I'm not collecting data in order to be able to sell kids other apps and other things like that. The only reason I need data is to make sure that the things we're doing are most efficacious for kids. The reason school districts need data is to make sure you can customize the learning experience, make sure you can constantly get smarter about your kids. That's a classical function governed by federal law, and it ought to remain that way. And I am happy to live with batched and anonymized data so that I can do what I need to do. I don't need to know anything about you individually.
Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, first of all, I would like to note for the record, Joel Klein is the most casually dressed man on the panel today. Pretty amazing for a former attorney general, among other things. Anyway, we think at Common Sense, we think this is a big deal. I was really glad you raised it. We're going to try to come out with sort of a broad set of principles really soon around school privacy. And it's pretty, and we've done, as some of you guys know, we've done a lot of work around kids' privacy in general. We just hired Joni Lupovitz from the Chief of Staff to the Chairman of the FTC here in DC. So we think it's a really big issue. But it's simple, and I actually think that you guys are answering it the right way. It's pretty much a common sense answer. It's about the privacy issues that the schools need it for the right reasons, and we all know that, and you need to use the data for educational purposes and for the benefits of the kids, not to make money off of them. There's a way to come up, and there are a lot of rules on the book already, Joel, but we're going to have to frame that. And I think all of us here who are operating in this space are going to have to recognize that. And the more we speak with a pretty broad collective voice on this, the better, because it will come. There's no question this issue is going to come up. And we should really do it thoughtfully. And ultimately, it's got to be student and teacher centered. And for that purposes, for educational purposes, and we'll come up with a simple framework that I hope will work.
Yeah, and I happen to think it's one of the fastest and most important emerging issues. Let me say, in full disclosure, I co-chair In Bloom, which is building an infrastructure. And one of the key areas that is so important is that everyone understands is that whatever infrastructure you use should not permit the district, should not have any policies for dissemination of that data other than the district. And so it's the district that determines how that data is used, and the infrastructure should only be a storing house. In some ways, a safety deposit box. Each district puts its money, or puts its safety deposit box in and decides on the conditions under which it's withdrawn. I do think that data in education is at the same stage that data was at in the health industry about 10 or 15 years ago. And so that there is a need for much more discussion with parents, with teachers, with everyone, so that we're all more sophisticated. I don't think anyone appreciates today how much data is being used routinely in a district. It's not just the grade book with the grades, the absences, and the disciplinary actions. I mean, in order for personalization to take place, and for the teacher, he or she desperately needs that data, needs those dashboards. But it's important. This is going to be, Jim, I think, one of the fastest growing areas that we all have to be upfront about and confronting and talking openly with the public about.
Great. So we're out of time, and we're going to turn to a 5-minute break in just a second. But I want to put the panel in context and thank our panelists. We began the morning talking about disrupting American education, and not just tinkering around the edges, but really disrupting it. It's really clear to those of us who've worked in the field for a long time that technology has too often been a supply push effort. And I think what we've been hearing this morning is that for the first time in our lifetimes, there is a substantial and sustained demand pull for new ideas, new technology, new tools to meet the new challenges that we have as a country and as a people. And that in that demand, I think, is the heart of the disruption that we're going to spend the rest of the day talking about. So please join me in thanking the panelists.